magic hour of 2:15, and if we're going to get out of here at 4, we're going to start right now. Before we begin our official program, I'm going to invite Ross Jordan up from Jane Addams Hull-House to say a few words.
Hey, my name's Ross Jordan. I just wanted to welcome you all here. I'm sure a lot of you have been to the museum, but just a show of hands, how many of you have visited our museum? Oh, that's fantastic. So if you haven't been to the museum before, it consists of 2 buildings. This is the residence dining hall. And right next door, unfortunately we're closed on Mondays, is the Jane Addams Hull-House home. The museum essentially is a site where we connect the past and the present. And of course, Jane Addams was a strong peace fighter. And we're celebrating that this year with one particular exhibition that's relevant to all today called True Peace, the Presence of Justice, which is about Jane Addams' early peace organizing. She's the co-founder of the Women's International League of Peace and Freedom, which was founded in 1915 and is the longest running kind of organized peace movement started by women in the country. It's still alive and well today. So when we're open again, I would totally invite you all back to see the exhibit, to learn about that history. I also just want to highlight this on the way out. We have an upcoming event on December 10th where we celebrate Jane Addams, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1935. And so come back for this particular event. We'll be celebrating peace and contemporary activism like we're doing here today. But we're really super happy to be partnering with the Chicago Veterans for Peace today for this event and talking about turning this particular day into an event that really celebrates peace and focuses on anti-militarization activation. So welcome. Come back and see us again when the museum's open. Anyway, it's good to have you all. Looking forward to the conversation.
I want to thank Jennifer Scott and Michael Ramirez. Jennifer Scott is the director and the curator of the Jane Addams Hull-House Museum, and as you can see, they're typically closed on Monday, but she allowed us to come in, and the staff came in. Hopefully they're getting paid for this, but it was very nice of them to do that. A little background on Armistice Day. Hopefully you're familiar with that, but it started in 1918 with the end of World War I, and they declared this a day to celebrate peace worldwide. And over the course of the years, as we typically do in the United States, we've turned a peace day into another military day, which drives me crazy, very honestly. And Veterans for Peace in the United States has started an initiative called Reclaim Armistice Day. And there's chapters all across the country doing similar things to what we're doing here, and not using that other word that they describe this day as, and always calling it Armistice Day. So you will see most VFP people out there calling this day Armistice Day as opposed to whatever they call it now. I don't like the word. And it's very, I couldn't think of a better place where we could have this event than Jane Addams Hull-House. Jane Addams worked for peace and justice on many levels. And on this day, I remember her as she fought very hard to not get us involved in World War I. And then she kept fighting, for the war to end. So here we are, somebody who was, a peace person, Chicago's most famous peace person, and ended the war, and was probably involved with having it named Armistice Day. So we're here to reclaim that day, in the name of Jane Addams and everybody who works for peace. Our event is called Imagine Armistice in Chicago. And we know armistice means put down your arms. But imagine is a very strong word. And if you look at history, virtually nothing happens unless somebody imagined that it would happen. One of the things I read, talked about, and my antenna has been pretty high about imagine for a while, but one of the things I read talked about, one of the examples would be John Kennedy, when he said, we're going to put a person on the moon within 10 years. Now, he imagined that happening. Otherwise, if you can see it, you can make it happen. And sure enough, within 10 years, it took 400,000 people to do it. But we did it. We did it. And I think we can do the same thing here in Chicago if we imagine what it would be like if we didn't have all the violence. The second part of the incentive to name this Imagine comes from a John Lennon song called Imagine. The word, if I could sing anything, I wouldn't do that. But the words to that song are very, very powerful. So imagine all the people living in peace. Imagine that. I mean, in our environment, it's very hard to imagine that, but it can happen if we can imagine it. So those are the two incentives for calling this Imagine Armistice in Chicago. I'm going to give you an overview of what's going to happen here. I hope we have 5 panelists, and they're going to each have about 10 minutes to describe what it is they do and perhaps how they got involved in what they do. So that'll take about 50 minutes. Then we're going to have a Q&A, and we're going to pass out cards so you can write questions down and submit them to either myself or Natasha, who is the deputy coordinator for the chapter. And we'll collect them, and one of us will read them to the panel. After that, there's going to be a breakout session that's going to be facilitated by Natasha. I don't know why I can't say her name today, but you get a chance to talk to each other and exchange ideas, and then we'll come back together and conclude. We'll conclude at 4:00, and that's how it's going to go. So I'm going to introduce the panelists if they want to come up. I've got your names spread across the table here so you know where to sit. But let me start with Valerie. Valerie Burgest, she's with Moms Demand Action, the Illinois chapter leader. Been doing this for a period of time. Is that hard to get to? I'm sorry about that. I guess speakers, you got to go around the other way. Is China here? There you are, China. China's with Good Kids Mad City. That is, I guess I'll call it a coalition or a group of black and brown youth united to end violence. She's an organizer and an activist and a senior at King College Prep. Carmel Brown, there you are. I saw you on the way in. No, I saw you going up to the bathroom, actually. By the way, the bathrooms are on the second floor, elevator or stairway. Carmel's with the Chicago Children's Advocacy Center. She's a licensed clinical social worker and director of MDT, which I don't know what that means. Multidisciplinary team. Yes, that's good. And I looked it up, and they are the only nonprofit in the city that coordinates efforts to protect children. And there's a lot of groups who are doing various things, but they they coordinate it and make sure the best thing happens for the child. Andy Thayer. There's Andy. I didn't ask Andy what he wants me to say, so I'm just going to ad-lib it here. He's with the Gay Liberation Network. Actually, he's the founder of it. And it's LGBTQ folks, but they don't just focus on their issues. They're out to fight oppression in all forms for anybody. Is that about right, Andy? Yay. And then Natasha is, there she is. Natasha is a CPS parent of a high school junior and a 20-year veteran of the Air Force, retired about 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. With that, oh, just spilled my water. How cool. Let's start with Valerie and then work on down the line.
I just have one point of clarification.
Go ahead.
One point of clarification. So everyone is going to kind of take turns. We'll go through just a brief 2-minute introduction of ourselves, and then our work, and then we'll go back into the discussion.
You want to
Is that okay with everyone?
Deputy Coordinator.
Yes.
We'll start off with like a 2-minute introduction,
Okay.
and then we'll work our way through, and then start with our panel discussion. Is that okay? Okay.
My name is Valerie Burgest, and as Arnie said, I am one of the Illinois. My name is Valerie Burgest. And as Arnie said, I am one of the co-chapter leads for Moms Demand Action for the state of Illinois. I became involved with gun violence prevention because almost 6 years ago, my only child, Craig Williams, was shot and killed on the south side of Chicago. And in order for me to be able to deal with the pain of losing my son, I had to find a way to cope, and my way of coping was to become involved with gun violence prevention.
I'm Andy Thayer. I'm not only with the Gay Liberation Network, I'm also with the Chicago Committee Against War and Racism, and my remarks that I'll go into a little bit later are really about addressing the causes of violence, whether you're talking about state violence here in our city by the police or about the numerous wars that plague the world.
Hi, everybody. My name is Carmel Brown. I am the director of MDT coordination of the Chicago Children's Advocacy Center. And what the Chicago Children's Advocacy Center does is that we investigate child sexual abuse. And so all cases of child sexual abuse where the offender is a person of trust or in a position of authority or a family member, all those cases are investigated at the Chicago Children's Advocacy Center. We actually investigate about 3,000 cases a year. So far, and on average, we have about 200 cases a month that come in. And as a director of MDT coordination, I am actually, my responsibility is to make sure that all the different partners work together. And so at the Chicago Children's Advocacy Center, we have the police department. We have about 41 investigators who work there. We have the child protection investigators through DCFS, and so we have those individuals who work there. We also have state's attorneys who prosecute the cases, and they're also based at the Chicago Children's Advocacy Center. We have a medical clinic that is funded through Stroger Hospital, and they do all the medical evaluations there. And then we also have the intake department, the forensic interviewing unit, and forensic interviewing is individuals who are trained to provide neutral and fact-finding interviews of children who have been alleged to be victims of child sex abuse. And so we also have an advocacy department, and we have a mental health department. And so my job is to make sure everybody gets along. So as you can see, my job is stressful. And so I'm happy to be here today because this is a lot better than being at work right now.
My name is China. I'm an activist and organizer at Good Kids Mad City. Good Kids Mad City, as he stated earlier, is an activist platform that advocates for fights against the inequities that plague Black and brown communities. I became involved with Good Kids Mad City. It was sophomore year when I found out about them. Good Kids Mad City is a branch off of Black Lives Matter Chicago, and it's more focused and more, intimate interactions with the community. We've worked with other organizations such as COCO, BYP 100, Asada's Daughters, many more to come. And we've made milestones in about a year and a half. That's really how long we've been doing this, because sophomore year is when it began happening, and we officially began in April 2018. So it's been a little over a year now.
Good job. Good afternoon. It's so good to see you all, so many familiar faces. My name is Natasha. I'm a CPS parent. My daughter is a high school junior, so it's a good time to be, just coming off the strike, kind of, still talking about what that means from a social justice perspective. As a parent, I'm very active and concerned about, or I would say deeply invested in the social justice or lack thereof that I see across Chicago public schools. So recently, elected a local school council member where I really got to, get in and study the school's budgets and realize how different schools are because of the money and the way that they're levied between the school systems. And then one of the other things that's really important to me in the chapter, Veterans for Peace Chicago, is around the militarization of Chicago public schools. Mm-hmm. Chicago is the most, or CPS is the most militarized school district in the nation. And having spent 20 years on active duty, I struggle with, there's only one narrative that the young people hear about, right? And that's the glory, that's the patriotism, and the pride that comes along with serving the country. And so a part of the speakers bureaus, and when we get out and we want to talk to the schools around the veteran experience, right? It's not all bad, but we want young people to know before they sign up in the senior year and commit themselves to war. And we know that people make this a decision because of economy and just different reasons. So just really excited to be here. One, to just be one of the voices around veterans who can help, because I was born and raised in Chicago, right? To help connect the stories between the military that I experienced and the community.
And how do you want me to lead? So as I said earlier, I became...
What should we do?
What should we do? Okay. I don't know what we should do. I just know that we have to do something. My work in gun violence prevention has provided me a platform in which to talk about the violence that goes on in our city, to advocate for collaboration, not just laws, because Moms Demand is also a subsidiary of Everytown for gun safety. And when I first joined Moms Demand, I sat at a meeting and they were talking about bills and supporting bills and legislative action, and I thought to myself, what does that have to do with the everyday urban gun violence that's going on in this city? And then I thought, well, maybe this is not where I need to be. Maybe this is not going to be a good platform for me. Then I thought again, this is exactly where I need to be. Because if I don't take a seat at the table, I can't have a say in how the script is written. So I stayed at that table. And now we're beginning to not just focus our efforts and our activities on legislative action, but on collaborations with community-based organizations who are boots on the ground. And I can't say enough of how that is going to ultimately lead to a change in what we see in this city. We can't change gun violence in this city until we change the narrative. It's not just a Black and brown problem, it's all of our problems, because we are impacted every single day. It's gonna become, and if it hasn't already, everybody in this room and outside of this room will know somebody who has been a victim of gun violence. And that's not how we should live. I should not have had to lose my only child because he decided to go to a store before taking some friends home to buy some snacks, and somebody else decided that his life was not worth living. My son also left behind 2 young children who will only know their father through the stories that me and other family members and friends tell them. That's not how we should live. So I devote my time when I'm not working a full-time job. I devote my energies and I devote my time to learning how to collaborate, to work with other community-based organizations, to try to come up with solutions to how do we end gun violence in this city. You'll hear things like root causes. And we pretty much know what the root causes are. We know that it's poverty. We know that it's unemployment. We know that it's food deserts. We know that it's affordable housing. We know that all of those factors contribute to gun violence in this city. And where is most of the problems concentrated? They're concentrated in Black and brown communities. And I don't care whether it's a Black and brown community that's middle class or low income, those problems are concentrated in our communities. And until we begin to think that it's not, to start changing that it's not our problem and that it's only affecting them and not us, we will not be able to change the script. We will not be able to change the narrative. And we will not be able to reduce gun violence in not just Chicago, but in any city. I had a conversation with a gentleman coming in, and we talked about the fact that Chicago is not the worst place in the world in terms of gun violence. We do not have the highest rate of gun violence, but one person killed in whether it's Chicago or St. Louis or New Orleans is one too many because it's senseless, and we do not have to deal with that, or we shouldn't have to deal with it on an everyday basis.
Thank you, Valerie. I've historically approached the issue of violence, aside from being bashed in my youth, from a standpoint of an anti-war activist. And ever since I became politically mature in 1978, if you will, and started caring about issues. I have been an anti-war activist, and we've been in one war after another. And for all the trauma that people talk today on quote-unquote Veterans Day about the trauma done to veterans, we have to remember the much greater trauma inflicted on the victims of the U.S. Armed Forces and how many fewer resources they typically have available to them. The people of Iraq, the people of Afghanistan, decades of war, and I think that we have to keep that in mind. But what I wanted to address today is how do we stop violence? It is such a huge problem. It's easy to get numbed. It's easy to get driven into action out of despair, and those are totally human responses. But I want to start with a message of hope that violence is actually not typical of the human species. I know that sounds strange, but violence is not typical of the human species. The inequality that Valerie talked about is not typical of the human species. The human species has been on the planet for approximately 350,000 years. And of those 350,000 years, so-called class societies, whether feudalism or other class societies, let alone today's capitalism, have only been around for 10,000 years. And what anthropologists will tell you is that in most of these pre-class societies that predated the last 10,000 years, people largely got along. Men and women treated each other with a rough equality. And the societies all around the world, regardless of geography, did not have violence as the constant theme that we see here today in the United States and around the world. And I think that's very, very important. Now, there are a lot of causes of violence in today's society. Lead poisoning, for example, has been linked There was a Nation article a few years ago that talked about lead poisoning, yet here in our city, it was actually mandatory that pipes going into residential housing be made of lead until 1986, when it was banned by the federal government. And you look at atrocities like Flint, Michigan, and you say, why are we still doing this? But the main thing is that the violence is not inevitable. I think that you look around the world, not just within our city, but around the world, the societies that are the most unequal are the ones that have the most violence. There's something that was invented around 1912, I believe, called the Gini coefficient, or the Gini index, which measures inequality. And you look around the world today, and I did a little study of this prior to the 2 mayoral elections ago, because I wanted to look at, well, why are all these mayoral candidates calling for more police in our society, in our city, which has more police than just about any other major city in the United States? In fact, my study of the FBI uniform crime statistics found that of the 650 cities in the United States with over 50,000 people in them, the city of Chicago had the 3rd highest police officer to civilian ratio. Number 1 was Washington, D.C. Number 2 was Baltimore. And none of those 3 cities can say they've got a sterling record in terms of violence. And so I took a look at it, and it's this Gini coefficient. You look around the world, the societies that are the most unequal, I'm talking like Brazil, Honduras, and other countries with high rates of violence, also, not coincidentally, have got the highest inequality between rich and poor. And so a lot of the things that the Black Lives Matter activists have been saying ever since they started organizing about, we need to stop defunding our communities, we need to fight for the sort of things that the Chicago Teachers Union fought so effectively for in the last contract round. These are the things that we need to do to stop violence. Now, it's not enough to say that we can just mitigate violence, because I think we should be fighting for a world that's very different. A world where there is not only no violence or very little violence, but also a world where people don't needlessly starve, where people don't needlessly do without education or health care. The human species is capable of this, I believe. And that's, rather than fighting a labor of Sisyphus year after year after year of, let's just have a slightly less brutal Chicago Police Department, or a slightly less brutal prison system, or a slightly less beautiful. I hear the phrase humane U.S. foreign policy, and I think, what an oxymoron. That we need to strive for much better than that. We need to strive for a society where people truly are equal, where there isn't violence. And I think, as the anthropological history that I just gave shows, the human species is capable of it. I'll leave it to others to talk about ways we can get there, but I think it's important to hold out that hope, because if we just look at the day after day after day violence, it's easy to be numbed into despair and inactivity. And that's precisely what those on the other side want us to be doing, is not doing anything about it.
Hi, everybody. I don't have a prepared speech, so I'll just talk a little bit about some of the things that we try to struggle with and deal with at the Children's Advocacy Center. So I routinely do presentations at the Advocacy Center on sexual violence. And one of the things I think people forget or people don't talk about is sexual violence. And because it's a taboo, because we're not comfortable talking about sex, we're not comfortable talking about the things that happen related to sex. And because we're not comfortable talking about it, we also aren't comfortable talking about it when things happen that shouldn't happen in the home and family life and so on and so forth. But 1 in 6 males will be victimized by sexual violence. 1 in 5 women will be victimized by sexual violence in their lifetime. And a lot of times we need to really figure out why, not a lot of times, we need to figure out why this happens. And one of the things that I've been doing since I've been in the Advocacy Center is looking at myths and stereotypes. You know, there are lots of myths and stereotypes about why sexual violence occurs or how we justify sexual violence. But one of the things that happens is, as we think about sexual violence, we rely on something called rape myths. And rape myths actually give us an understanding of the world that is based on flawed and wrong thinking. And so many times when we hear somebody has been raped or assaulted or victimized, we often have to think, this couldn't happen to me. This happened to someone else because they were engaging in certain types of behaviors. Maybe they were wearing a dress that we thought was too short. Maybe they went outside in a place where they should. Maybe they broke curfew. And so one of the things that we try to advocate at the Chicago Children's Advocacy Center is that violence never is the responsibility of the victim. It's not up to the victim to protect themselves from violence. It's up to the offender not to commit violence. It's not okay to hurt people, no matter what is going on. And so we actually often talk about the imperfect victim. One of the things that Natasha talked to me about when she called me, and she wanted me to come and be on the panel, is I just did a presentation on the myth that men aren't raped or sexually assaulted. And that's a myth. 1 in 6 men will be sexually assaulted in their lifetime. And another thing that people may not know is that there's a high correlation between men going into the military as a way to escape violence in their home. And there's a high connection between people who have been abused in their home of origin and enlistment in the military. Many times people go in the military as a way to find peace, which is sort of ironic. We go to war to find peace from home. We go to war to learn how to kill because we have been traumatized and perpetuated against violence in our home environment. We have people who go to the military because they want to die, and it is their hope that they will be killed in the military because to them that's a better way of dealing with the violence that's been perpetuated against at home, as opposed to simply saying, hey, mommy, this happened to me. You know, because there's a myth that says that men aren't sexually assaulted. There's a myth that says men can't be raped. And it is a myth because men are raped. And one of the things that we talk about at the Chicago Children's Advocacy Center is that giving people the opportunity to really speak their truth, whatever that truth might be. And being able to say, hey, you know, there are lots of things that we think, stereotype threats and myths about rape that actually influence the way that people operate in the world. One of those myths is that it's stranger danger. You guys have all heard stranger danger. We grew up on stranger danger. Stranger danger is one of the most dangerous myths that exist. Because in the Chicago Children's Advocacy Center, again, 3,000 people come to our doors every year, 200 every month. 95% of those people who walk in our door know their offender. They are related to their offender. They are their mothers and their fathers and their stepfathers and their brothers and their sisters. And they are their friends. And they are their coaches or pastors. And so we want to make sure the world knows that that's not a thing. We need to stop talking about that. All right? Now, we're not saying that violence by strangers doesn't happen, but you're much more likely to be assaulted by someone you know than that person who's hiding behind the tree in the raincoat that people have been hearing about all their lives. So we often talk about those myths. There are other myths. Again, that myth that men can be raped or sexually assaulted, that's a myth. That myth that consent can only be given at one time. Consent is freely given and should be given throughout the entire process. In certain states, actually I think it's in North Carolina, I might be wrong, but there's a state, and I want to say it's North Carolina, where a woman, once she says yes, woman, male, they say yes to the initiation of the sexual act, they do not have the right to then say no throughout the process. In fact, in that state, it says that if you said yes, and at some point you change your mind, that the male or the woman, whoever's engaging in that sexual activity to you, has the right to continue. There have been many people who have fought this. It's gone to the Supreme Court. It continues to still exist in, what year is this? 2019, all right? And what does that say? It says that we think that men, because this law is actually directed towards men, men don't have the capacity to monitor their impulses. They're monitored or they're fueled by these carnal impulses. It also says that women, we don't have the right to have ownership of our bodies throughout the process. And it talks a little bit about all the different things that go into why people think that it's okay to commit violence against people. Child sex abuse is something that is consistent. It happens all around. I guarantee you that everybody in this room, I guarantee, knows somebody who was a victim of child sexual assault or sexual violence. I guarantee that. I am convinced of that. You may not, that person may have never talked to you about that. They may never talk to you about that, but they're out there, right? And that's why we exist. And I'm sure that you guys will have questions, so I'm going to shut up now.
So my chit chat will probably rather be one of the more strong, not long ones, you know. So with being a part of Good Kids Mad City, I've realized that Good Kids Mad City is the ideal structure for me of any revolution. You have an adult giving us the knowledge that they have and helping us, and then you have the young people going out there and doing things. Thus, Good Kids Mad City. And there's this quote that I've been trying to live by. It's by Huey Newton. Excuse me if I'm off on the little words. It says, the first lesson a revolutionary must learn is that he's a doomed man. And with me and my advocacy, you know, you mentioned earlier, a seat at the table. I think that's very important because in any revolution, any form of change, I think the very first step is education. You know, you can't fight for something if you're not aware of what's going on. And oftentimes it's not our faults. You know, growing up, I did not know that I was a victim of inequality. In my head, it was just so normalized. And as I got older and I learned about everything and learned that I was a doomed man, doomed woman, doomed person, you know, it drove the passion behind the activism. And moving forward, you know, speaking about the seat at the table, when you have a seat at the table and you know exactly what you're fighting against, it makes things much more effective. And with revolution, I think it's really tricky to, you know, talk about what should be done because, you know, some issues are just etched so deeply into history that it's hard to, you know, fight against it. You know, one of our more recent platforms we took up was the CTU strike, and I came face to face with the ugliest form of adultism and speaking out against this, you know, just talking to adults, non-CTU adults, about how I felt about the strike. I found that they were very, you know, condescending on me, you know, and even though it is a CTU effort, we still have a right to speak up about it and show our support for the CTU. So when adults look at me and, you know, try to speak to me as if I don't know what I'm fighting for, I feel that that's to my face denying my seat at the table. So I just wanted to leave that with you guys. Thank you.
As a veteran, I really do appreciate when people say thank you for your service. So on days like today, it's, you know, people that don't know, people that, particularly those that have not worn combat boots or have ever had a deployment experience, don't really know what it means when a veteran sometimes hear, thank you for your service. So today what I want to do is kind of talk about a little bit why I get a pull in my stomach or in my gut when I hear thank you for your service. And again, I would just want to, you know, preface what I'm going to say today, that I feel really empowered to be one of the few veterans that kind of can talk about the good things. I could sit here and tell you thousands of good news stories and accolades and travel and these great experiences that most people, the dominant narrative about military service, right? You know, all the things that I did to sacrifice and the times that I spent away from my daughter. But what I really want to do is talk about, again, why there's this pit in me, a fire, I'll call it that, to speak out on some of the other experiences, the ugliest parts of the military and what I experienced on active duty. And so, just in that spirit, when I talk about citizens or civilians who have not worn those boots or have experienced a deployment, I know that you can't fathom what it's like to have deployed to Iraq, Afghanistan, Kuwait, and so many other theaters, Turkey, and so many other theaters, and to not even really be able to unpack that experience while you're on active duty because you're in the fight with that mission or with that unit. But it's oftentimes when you separate or retire from the military. So in my case, I retired, and it took me, and I still feel like I'm going through that process, but it took me the better part of a year to unpack that military experience, not just as an airman, but as a Black woman. And so the first thing I want to start off with is saying is that experiencing war is unnatural, right? Like, everyone on the panel was just talking about violence in a different way and how it shows up, but really actually being there and participating in it, whether you support it from behind the fence or you were outside the wire, as they call it, war can chip you off if you let it, right? There's things that you experience that you just can't let go. So when I talk about that, I'm really highlighting the fact that I know that veterans, a lot of my comrades, survive with significant guilt, moral injury, and really just regret for the things that they have participated in or facilitated in a myriad of different ways. Things that at one time, got them promoted, things that at one time were on a decoration or a medal that they're pretty proud of. At some point, you start to, and for a lot of folks, it doesn't happen until you're off active duty and you're not around those people, so it's hard to experience or to even understand what you're unpacking. So in my case, I'm back home in Chicago. There's no military base here. There's not a lot of or strong circle and connection of veterans who have been on active duty for 20 years like me. So I'm rare in my experience that I've seen so much and experienced a lot. And so one of the things that comes up is like, how do we create these communities how do we create a community where folks back home, right, civilians, are able to connect and help veterans kind of reacclimate, right, and so that we're not just kind of talking past or existing past each other. And I feel that in attention when I'm talking at like CPS, the Board of Education, they're looking at me like, what do you mean JROTC is a bad thing? We love it. Our students love it. Yeah, they do, because they have a singular I would say, notion or narrative of what the military is. And while we don't want to share extreme stories, what we're saying is that there should be a balanced expectation for young people before they go into the military. So we have a hard time getting Chicago Public Schools to understand that it's important for Veterans for Peace to come into the schools at some point or just participate in curriculum to share some of that balanced narrative. So if there's one thing that I will ask, I'm going to ask 3 things of you today. If there's one thing that I'll ask in any capacity in which you have to ever come out to the Board of Education meetings and talk out about that, right? And closely, not just around JROTC, but what we're talking about is instead of investing in military training for young people, how about we put that into the arts? How about we put that into experiences that can grow global leaders and not teach our young people that, to glorify the military doctrine. So that's one thing. Speak out on JROTC and enforce and ensure that CPS starts to invest more in the arts. And not just that, from a career perspective, we see CPS, really lowering their investment in career and technical education, right? If you remember, when I was a CPS student in the 90s, there was so many opportunities to be to receive your certificates and accreditation upon high school graduation, right? Because for several years, you may have been in auto mechanics, you may have been in fabrication, so it was a lot of times that people were graduating high school at 18, 19 years old, going out to the airports, making $19, $20 an hour. In 1996, that was a lot of money, right? And so we see that those programs have been divested and they're pulled out of schools, and those same schools are replacing opportunity with JROTC, particularly in the Black community and schools that are neighborhoods that are traditionally marginalized. So we see 90% of the students, 95% of the students that are enrolled in JROTC are either Black or Latinx. And we know if it's so good, right, the numbers would just be a whole lot different. So it's really in the spirit that we want to talk to those young people about the experience. And around that, and I talk about, veterans who have like a lot of moral injury and are struggling to kind of unpack them with the polarizing world around this administration and, potential other endless wars that the country is looking to, or conflicts that America is looking to get into. It really does take all of us to kind of be aware and to speak out on war anytime we see it. And I see it really closely as JROTC being a recruitment tool of young people, because it is unpopular to enlist. All of the services or branches of service are struggling with their recruitment. And so you'll see that the spike is up for new programs in the inner cities. And I'll just be quite honest, for the things that veterans struggle with, I think everyone knows that's why around 22 veterans per day take their life, because it is hard to grapple with and to reacclimate to civilian sector. One, because there might be miscommunication and misunderstandings between friends and family, right? Like, you don't know how to really talk about what you've experienced, because most people who've never worn the boots or experienced a deployment experience can't collaborate. So you kind of withdraw and socially isolate yourself, which we know is just not good, right? So I just really want to lift up that if we normalize the conversations between veterans and perhaps how we can make them feel more at home, those numbers of 22 per day, we would see that would definitely go down. I believe in that. I believe that the VA is years behind even being able to grapple with this, right? Like, moral injury is such a new term that it's not even really said. I believe that the VA is still trying to understand for most of the providers who have never worn the boots. So you have mental health care that just doesn't rise to the level of need. Most people today, when I retired in 2017, I have friends who are deploying on their 10th deployment. So this is not, and it's because it's tied to promotion. So if you're on active duty today and you don't deploy, you won't be promoted. So there's the incentive. Most people don't want to go, but 10 times is a lot of times, and I just share that because this isn't your grandfather or grandmother's military where you go to a single conflict and that's your story. Many people are going to the same places and coming back hard broke, and most people on active duty don't get the service and the help that they need because there's this, just keep going. You're hard and you can take it. So it's not popular yet to be able to normalize mental health care on active duty. So a lot of these people come out needing the VA to be able to support them, and they're just not finding that support there. So I feel like that's one of those really important things that when we talk about veterans and those that either don't have VA access or don't trust the VA. But I just want to cover one of the reasons why some of the veterans don't have access to the VA, unfortunately, is one of the things that I really feel particularly strong about or empowered to talk about is the acute racism and discrimination that happens on active duty, right? And I'll just tell you quickly how that plays out. If there are two people, one of them black and one of them white, and they commit the same offense, that black person, airman, soldier, Marine, all of the research and data show how unequal and inequitable the punishment is, right? So there are some people that can get the benefit, and then there are those who get the dishonorable, what would you call it? The dishonorable discharge that limits or severely cuts off their opportunity to get VA benefits, educational benefits, housing. So when you look at it like that, I see this as a really important issue that I'm, starting to team with other veterans to talk about how can we get some congressional attention on talking about those that have been wronged and cut off from the services and care that they need from a VA perspective. And then for the veterans that I know that are black and women, it's safe to assume that she's experienced acute racism, assault, harassment, sexism, biases, and discrimination. This type of violence is usually silenced on active duty and in military circles, so she most likely won't talk about it. The mother who served regrets missed bonding, birthdays, school plays, field trips, while deployed away from their babies as soon as 6 months postpartum. That's difficult. And that's why my voice shake a little bit, because that's a part of my story. And it wasn't until I was getting ready to retire, my daughter was in the 8th grade, that I realized, like, well, I missed out on a lot, right? Thus, the reason that I'm just so involved in her high school years, kind of to make up for that lost time, right? Because being away, a part of being in some of the units that I was in, it really required me to be away for a lot of time. So whether it was my daughter would come back home to Chicago to stay with family while I was deployed, at the time when I was married, we would go at separate times, right? So there used to be a military rule that if you were married male to male, military to military, you can't go on a deployment together. So what was happening was one spouse would go for 6 to 9 months, they would come back, and then the other spouse would go for 6 to 9 months. So what that did, at least in my case, is it fractured my marriage, right? It made it hard to connect with my husband. And at the time when neither one of us were talking about our mental health or what we experienced on that deployment, it chipped us off as a couple and as a family. So for the women veterans that I think particularly it's a unique experience, and I can only talk about it because that's my experience, right? Going through racism, I think going through racism and biases sometimes looks like black tokenism, right? Being the only black woman in a room, really knowing how it feels to feel or have this exceptional expectation in order to be promoted and to be in these circles. And I think that being at the times when women need support, those things are just kind of denied in the military circle. So when I talk about the VA as well, they have a lot of ground to make up when they talk about the care for the woman veteran, because her experience is so unique. And again, I said I could sit here and talk about my experiences, but one of the really things that I want to share before I close is an experience around 2009 and 10, if you all remember, the Obama administration mandated the drawdown from Iraq to Afghanistan. Does everybody remember that? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that that I was called to do was to go on a joint deployment with the Army unit, and we met Marines while there, and draw down or extract all of the military equipment that's in Iraq and plus it up or move it to Afghanistan. Well, I guess you could say some folks, we did it too good, because a lot of the equipment that was sent to Afghanistan wasn't needed in Afghanistan or couldn't be used. And I'll tell you about that. If you think about the terrain in Iraq, it's flat, it's desert. And if you think about the terrain in Afghanistan, it's mountainous, right? And it's just a completely different landscape. So what we didn't anticipate, and I won't say me, but those that wanted us to just kind of move everything to the next theater, was that we were creating parking lots or supply large warehouses of things that we couldn't use in Afghanistan. The media found out about that, took pictures, and it became a bad news story for the Obama administration. So one of the first, or I don't know, but I would just say what was decided was that that equipment would be removed from Afghanistan as quick as possible and given for free to some states and cities. So one of the programs that I was selected to work with was with the Joint Program Office for the Up Armor Vehicles. They're called MRAPs, Mine Resistant Ambush Protected Vehicles. And so we bought tons of these. And one of the things that was just really mind-blowing for me was when I realized that those vehicles were what they were being used for. So on one hand, I'm on active duty and I'm helping purchase these vehicles that I believe are going to keep my peers and comrades, right, safe, so that IEDs would not continue to devastate service members across overseas. But then when I saw that they were used in Ferguson, that's right, and in Baltimore, and in Chicago, and in Los Angeles, that I had this break. I was a master sergeant at the time. I was in a dream job at Special Operations Command, and I was closer to the truth. So I saw things on duty, and I saw what was reported on the news. They were never the same. and really seeing the military at home. And I couldn't, and it was hard for me because at the time, the Ferguson uprising was really, on live stream, so you had to know which link to go to be able to see what was going on. But the first time I saw an MRAP roll down Florissant Avenue, I mean, it was hard for me to reckon with that. Because here were vehicles that, I'll just read you a couple lines of a Joint Service Commendation Medal, because I'll tell you what I thought those vehicles were for, right? And basically it says, so I'm just going to skip to this part here where it says, exclusive expediter for 2,600 mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles. She was instrumental in completing 127 purchase requests for an X-wing antenna valued at $2 billion for outfitting that MRAP. She consistently advised senior leaders throughout the Army Central Command, U.S. Tank Automotive Command, Joint Program Office, and the Defense Logistics Agency on stock provisions and parts for over 11,000 weapon systems deployed throughout the U.S. Central Command area of responsibility. These vehicles kept our service members and civilians safe while abroad. The distinctive accomplishments of Sergeant, and then it goes on to talk about, you're so great. But what it never talked about, this decoration, what it never talked about is what those vehicles might, the unintended places that those vehicles might. So where you see them in Chicago, so it wasn't just Florissant Avenue during Ferguson after the killing of Michael Brown, it's seeing them being served across the street from the school on 44th and Drexel for a warrant, serving a warrant. And like in real life, I've sat outside the school waiting for my daughter to get out and seeing these vehicles ride down the street. It's pretty shocking. So one of the things that a part of the unpacking of the military experience was realizing, that our police departments are trained by the military. Our police departments wear the same gear as the military. The police departments receive this militarized front, right? I see certain things where there's an event that happens on a block and how they containerize that block in the area, and it's familiar to me. And it goes back to the things and experiences that I saw while at the special operations trainings, right? When we're talking about, just different types of warfare. And when I see that happening in the community here, it's hard for me to kind of, celebrate and accept those thank you for your service. So one of the things that I really want to, just ask people to do is think about the peace movement. I know that it is not something that a lot of our young people are involved in because we have made it seem like it's that distant thing over there, that it's against America or it's unpatriotic to talk about peace, but we should all be talking about peace. We should not be recruiting children from the south and west sides of Chicago to tell them that a way to escape violence is to enlist in the military. That is wrong. That is wrong. And then I think, with that, and one of the things that, I share this decoration, and when I'm talking to young people is so that they know some of the times that you participate in things and you don't know how that they're going to kind of come back and impact your own family and your own community, right? So there is a high price to pay that comes along with serving in the military and being able to reconcile with what you might have done. So that was the second ask, is just to get involved in the peace movement, really encourage young people if you know them, really encourage Black people if you know them, because I see that this is also a thing for Black service members and veterans to go back and talk to and make congressional testimonies. That's my goal. Something I'm working on next summer is to make sure that we go and talk to our elected officials when they're home in recess about some of the things that we experience, some of the things that we know that our brothers and sisters that are still in ranks are experiencing today, and we want them to kind of be able to have a fair shake when it comes to their benefits and make sure that they have what they need when they're trying to reacclimate back home. So that's the third thing, the second thing. And then the third thing that I was gonna ask you all is to really just be intentional about, folks don't know, like, what should we ask veterans, right? Really just ask a veteran, what are you comfortable in talking about? We don't want this to be a thing where veterans, you can't talk to them. And I had to tell my family, like, we're not doing that. We are not going to walk around here and pretend that I didn't experience the things that I did and you're scared to talk about it. So here are the boundaries, here are the things that I will talk about, and I'm good with that. So if you know a veteran, ask them what they're okay with talking about, meeting them where they are, involve veterans in the community. I feel like this social isolation amongst veterans, you know, get them outside of the circles and acclimate them into the things that you're doing, because veterans really have a unique experience and they're really ready to get back into the community. Thank you. Yeah, well, since our group is, I mean, we have such an intimate group, maybe folks would want to just raise their hand and just shout out questions instead of. We have some wireless mics. Why? Yeah. How are we on to? Yes, probably.
It's further.
Okay. Why did you join the military?
It's not on. Sorry. Mm-mm.
Why did you join the military? And do you think your reasons or your motivations 20 years ago are the same reasons people join RATS?
That's a great question. So I know the mic broke up a little bit, but her question was, why did I join the military? And essentially from the 20 years ago, do I believe that those young people that might choose to go or to enlist today will go for the same reasons that I did 20 years ago? So for the first reason, I was also a member of JROTC when I was in high school, and it's a slippery slope. JROTC, the next thing is the recruiters coming to the classroom to speak, and then next thing you know, the recruiters at the house, telling your parents how they can pay for education so that you will, and be able to travel the world. So in the 90s when I joined, there was no war, right? So there was no real conversation so I think it's really different now in terms of what I do it, to really consider where we are today in terms of conflicts overseas, that it's a really different military to enlist. But I do know that most people join for the same basic reasons you believe that there's opportunity, there's career, there's trade, and then there's the opportunity to be able to take care of and sustain yourself. And that's still a real thing. I think what we owe it to the young people is to share with them the things that might shock them, which start very early in basic training. You are being trained it's called warrior training, for a reason. Back when I was new, it was all peacetime and we prepared for war. Now they are strictly training for war, and most young people deploy within their first year. And that's something that I just think that we have to continue to talk to young people about, the differences of like where I was in the 90s when I enlisted and where things are today. I feel like it's just really different.
My question is for Carmel. I was wondering if you could say something about how you would approach making peace in families. I don't even know what to call it, to repairing families where sexual abuse has happened. Can you say something about that?
Are you specifically talking about with an offender or with the non-offending parent?
I guess any of them. Is
Okay.
it possible for the families to be repaired and to forgive, make amends?
Sure, absolutely.
those-
Well, one of the things that we figured out is that sexual abuse is such a significant source of injury for families. We actually have one of the things that we talk about is disclosure rates and why people recant, because very often kids will make allegations of sexual abuse and then recant those things. And people believe that when kids recant, it's because the original disclosure was a lie, but that's not actually true. Most of the time they recant because of the impact it's had on the family. And so they have realized that by telling their truth, this has impacted and damaged their family so significantly. So we get a lot of kids who will first give a disclosure and then later on recant disclosure based on how the family reacts. And so one of the things we found to be true is that if we can get the non-offending parent, that supportive parent, to be fully engaged in the process, it's much less likely that the recant will happen, that they will be consistent with the process. But it's one of the things that we actually struggle with quite a bit, because if you can imagine as a mom or a dad, if your child comes and tells you that the person that you're married to, the person that you love, the person that you're sharing your life with, has done something to your child in a way that you are unprepared for. And so what happens quite a bit is that parent, that mom, most of the time goes in denial and doesn't want to believe that it happened, because for them, the belief that this happened to my child means that I have to either accept that this person I love is a bad person, or I have to accept that maybe I'm just not the mom that I thought I was because I allowed this to happen. And so for quite a few parents, it's better for the child to say, did this really happen? Maybe you can change your mind. Maybe he didn't really touch you. Maybe he was giving you a hug and you felt weird about it. And so what we try to do is really try to give the mom the supportive understanding. One, unfortunately in our culture, this is actually much more common than it is not. And so trying to normalize that experience for the mom, trying to get them to understand that this actually happens quite a bit, trying to get them to understand that they're not to blame, that it's not okay for anybody to take on ownership of this. What we invariably in our society teach and educate people about how not to be a victim. And that's not what we should be doing. We shouldn't be teaching people how not to be victims. We should be telling people not to victimize, right? And so we need to get people to understand that it's not okay to do this. And so then when we have this situation, parents can then fully accept that this was not my fault. I did not have this happen to me. I'm not a bad person. I'm not a bad parent. This person who engaged in this behavior did bad things. So we actually have a lot of work that we do with the parent, because people can bounce back. Kids are incredibly resilient. We just had an amazing case. We had 2 kids from the Congo that actually talk about violence that came here through immigration. And so they were a brother and a sister. They were living with their father and their mom. Mom died through violence. Then father married again, and this brother was abused by stepmother. And then father died. And so then stepmother died. And so these 2 little kids, they were placed with aunt and uncle. Aunt and uncle, because of the nature of the violence of the Congo, decided this is the time for us to immigrate. So they started the process of immigration to the United States approximately a year ago. It took them about 7 months to get from the Congo to the United States. And through that process, they were on boats, they were on walking. They basically walked from, I think, Brazil to all the way to the United States. They basically were on foot. So these kids, in the process of walking and doing all this travel, these kids who had lost their mother, their father, were abused by a stepmother. They stayed in Brazil for 3 months, learned Portuguese. Then they moved to, I want to say, Dominican Republic or someplace else, learned Spanish for after a month. Just think about this, the trauma that they experienced. But in the meantime, 16 and 17, learned both Portuguese and Spanish, arrived here, and then they were separated from their aunt and uncle through the United States immigration process because they didn't have proof that they were related to their aunt and uncle. So they put them in 2 different camps. Aunt and uncle were sent to one camp. The 16 and 17-year-old was sent to another camp. To this day, they don't know where those individuals, where their aunt and uncle are. So they're placed, because they couldn't prove that they were related to aunt and uncle, they were placed with strangers. Now, this man who said, I was related to this family, uncle, came and got the kids. And how he got to us was he attempted to sexually molest these children. There was no proof that this man was connected to this family. It was only his word. So think about the irony of that. We have an aunt and uncle who've been with you for a year. We come to the United States, we separate you because we can't prove they're related to the children we've been caring for a year. But then we place you with a stranger who we're based only on his word that he's related to these kids. The kids have no idea who he is. They just believe him to be an uncle. They placed him with him, and now he is attempting to sexually molest them. But I bring that up as a point of resiliency, in that the girl, despite all of that, was like, this is not supposed to be happening to me. This is not okay. So she was actually put into CPS and told someone, and that's how she got involved. So now she's in a really good home. She's in a good foster placement. She still doesn't know where aunt and uncle is, but she is essentially in a safe place. But through all of that, when she gets to us, she's strong, she's resilient, she speaks now 4 languages as opposed to the 2 she started with, and she's actually just an incredibly intelligent young girl. And so, yes, I like to say all the time, people think that trauma is a terrible thing, and our kids actually do go through trauma, but yes, resiliency is within them. People can survive, people can adapt, people can adjust, and people can get better. And the last point of that is we have a program called Children Viewed with Sexually Problematic Behaviors. So a lot of times we do have kids who will act out sexually as offenders. One of the things I'm really trying to push and educate the community about is when juveniles act out sexually, it's not the same thing as an adult acting out sexually. So there is treatment for them, and there is significant progress. In fact, children who act out sexually only have about 11% recidivism rate, even without treatment. And with treatment, it's between 2 to 5% recidivism rate. So people can get better if they're given the support and the tools necessary for them to not ever offend again. So, long way to answer your question.
Yeah, my question goes back to the whole idea of ROTC and how it pulls kids in, and they need something in their lives and even a chance to serve. Is there any discussion going on right now about an alternative chance for kids to serve? And I know there's no funding for anything like this, but like there used to be the domestic Peace Corps. I can't even remember the name of it now. That's never what. Yeah, right, exactly. There's never any talk about that anymore, or there's never. It's not in the news anymore. Is there any talk about creating this sort of possibility for young people?
I think that's one of the key points that we talk about the resistance when we approach CPS. I know Veterans for Peace has been speaking at CPS meetings for over 2 years and has yet to really gain traction in the conversation around alternatives. So the district spends millions of dollars in military or JROTC funding. Instead, put that into career and technical training, which there's countless things. There's cosmetology, there's anything that these young people need to actually have a career certificate. And like you said, the Peace Corps, Job Corps, right? It's just not popular in the circles where the Department of Defense does put money into the school districts that have JROTC as well. So what you see is a school system that is divesting from opportunity. And again, I talk about arts, I talk about job training and how to resolve conflict. But instead, we put young people in marksman training and really just training them on American patriotism and military doctrine, which is priming young people to see the military in a way that it's not practically. So that's one of the things as a community I think that we should continue to put pressure. If you know anyone that's on the board or influence at the district, at CPS, talk to them about, the young people needing opportunities. We see the unemployment rate in Chicago. So if we had these opportunities in school, we know that young people will be better or more employable and feel confident in going out and filling these job gaps so that they can earn, a livable wage. So I see it as like not just around the training and career if they go into the military, but if we actually had this training in schools, we will see. I think there's like over 50% of young black males the age of 20, or excuse me, I believe it's 19 to 24 are either out of school or unemployed. And I look at the school district that doesn't really give, that doesn't really do a really good job of putting that education in front of them before they graduate.
I think our government, the big bulk of the money goes to the military. It doesn't go to education. It doesn't go to social services. The one thing that we can do is we can all be registered voters.
Yes.
Tell China, you can tell your fellow students that if you're, the presidential primary, we're from the League of Women Voters, the presidential primary is March 17th. You can register by February, I think it's 23rd or 28th. You can go to cookcountyclerk.com, RTV, register to vote. You can register to vote if you're 17 at the primary. If you're going to be 18 before November 3rd of 2020, you can register to vote. So citizens have to take the responsibility to drive the right politicians into office who want, control of guns, who want to reverse all this funding to the military. Let's give funding to education. Let's give funding to climate change. I just wish if all these countries that are having floods and fires and people migrating because their farmland is all in drought, if countries cooperated on climate change instead of killing each other, we'd have a peaceful world. I think what Andy says, we're not prone to be violent. We're prone to get along. But I think the people that are in charge are giving all this money, so all that money is in the federal budget, and then that's the chunk of money that goes to CPS for RATSI. But I mean, you tell your fellow students to get registered to vote, because we all have to go there.
I just really quickly just repeat a little bit of the question for the benefit of our CAN TV audience. Your question was about young people's activism in terms of voting in order to change how funding is used and what priorities are set by how the local government and out.
I'm actually happy you brought that up, because one thing that I noticed amongst our age range of young people, I'll just speak louder. I'm sorry. One belief that has been adapted by young people is that what's the point in voting? A lot of them learn how the Electoral College works, and they think, why do I vote anyway? And I personally believe that that's another reason to vote. If you want to make something happen, I think you should have your foot in every door. Mm-hmm. So yes, I will vote in the primary. Yes, I will work at the local level to try to change things. I will work with my school. And I'm just, with Good Kids Mad City, we're trying to promote that mindset amongst everybody. And I think that a lot of the young people can be very unmotivated. They know what's going on, but they don't, have the mindset of getting their foot in every door. So I'm actually happy you mentioned that.
I'd just like to comment on that. I just ask our audience, what percentage of the Chicago congressional delegation do you think voted for the latest record military budget for 2020? What percentage? Just shout it out. 100%. Every single Democrat, and I think there's one Republican, depending on how you count the delegation, every single one voted for record military spending. This isn't just a Republican problem. It is a bipartisan problem. And until all of us in this room and all the people out of this room hold the Democrats to the same standard as the Republicans currently in office, I can remember being part of the peace movement when people were protesting against Bush's war. But when it became Obama's wars, where did everyone go? There is a reason why we've got fifth-rate social services in this country in every single sphere. We have got the richest country that the world has ever known. We've got the worst public housing. We've got the worst health care. We've got the worst higher education. We've got the worst public transportation. You go right down the list. There's a reason why our veterans get the lousy health care that they get. There is a reason why our kids don't have all these wonderful social programs that the CTU and others were fighting for. And it is possible for us to win these things. We saw a glimpse of it in the recent CTU SEIU 73 strike. Because back in the 30s, in the Great Depression, people were doing things like mass strikes. There were 3 general strikes in this country in 1934. People were out in the streets when sheriffs tried to evict people from homes. We've got a homeless problem in this country, right? We got 87,000 homeless in our city of Chicago. We got 17,000 homeless CPS students. People in the 30s weren't taking that. They were going out on strike. They were shutting down this city. There was general strike in Toledo, in the Twin Cities, and in San Francisco in 1934 alone. And guess what? That Gini coefficient that I talked to you about the incredible inequality that we see in our country, that Gini coefficient went way down during that era. And unfortunately, in the decades since, it's gotten worse. Guess what? Another time that it got better was during the 1960s, when things like the Black Panther Party and others were demonstrating and making change through the school lunch programs and so forth, embarrassing the then Nixon administration to do this kind of social services that he himself hated. He was a racist, but he was forced to do these things. That's what we need to get back to. We can't be going hat in hand to these congressional Democrats and saying, would you please, can I convince you of doing the right thing? They know what they're doing. It's about time for us to get angry at these jerks. It's about time for us to get angry at the Rahm Emanuels and, yes, Lori Lightfoots of the world and live up to their promises. That's on us. Because as long as we go there hat in hand, they're going to think they can continue to fool us. It's time to get angry.
Ronald Jackson, mental health movement, Chicago. Activist also. We have been preached to and been told to pray. But while we've been told to pray, we've been preyed on. Mm-hmm. Sadly enough to say, and embarrassingly enough to say, in 1824 when the Ku Klux Klan came up with the acronym KIDS, it seems like now we don't call them children anymore. Everybody is a kid. We cannot continue keeping them down stupid. I say that because it was about an hour back and a week ago that Eddie Johnson said at the City Council budget hearing and confessed that the military gives freely military armament to police department. Mm-hmm. And the question was asked, well, do you give anything for it? Oh no, it's just a gift. A week before that, Trump came to Chicago and said, look at it. They told the police chiefs, look at all the military equipment that we're giving you. See, we can't believe that we are selling mass armament to Saudi Arabia. We can't believe that we're pulling out of one country into another, but then we want to go back just to protect oil. Mm-hmm. The sad part about it is, yes, mental health it's a math problem. When you talk about over 13,500 police officers, but up until the consent decree, they only had 3 psychologists on staff. Now with the consent decree, they might have a dozen. But now you have more police officers. We can't continue to believe that mental health is a joke. We can't believe that public schools don't need lower class participation, and the fact that from the early 1900s, we got away from EMS. We used to have schools named Montefiore. Well, you're a little too young for that. I mean, you know, I don't know if you know, but we used to have Montefiore. It was the bad girls' school, and we had another one for the bad boys. Okay, so the thing here is now we've just put a hodgepodge, just stirred everything up together, and expect school teachers to go in. Even the curriculum is not about us. These are old books taught by new wine, and we're not getting there. You know, my biggest concern, and that is, it's enough to have military experience. But I can show you as a mentor of at least 9 young men that are considered at risk. They're veterans, and they haven't left Chicago. Some of them haven't. Some of them, they were even amazed how easy it was just to cross over into Hammond, Indiana. Why? Because they don't leave the community, but they hear the gunshots. I don't know if you've ever gone down to Stateville Prison and done the walkthrough. I think you have, Andy. And, you know, because they have a gun range right there at the prison, 24/7. And these people are able to just go out there and fire weapons whenever they want to. That's the reason why when a person comes back out of the system, they're shocked at that first week when they get back, because they don't hear gunfire. You know, we can't continue preaching to the choir. The Lori Lightfoots that made promises and now all of a sudden wants to say, well, you know, I want it down the middle. No, she can't have it down the middle. See, because it's not hers, it's ours. But if we don't join together and actually make a stand and say, we need facts and not research. We need to invest in proven responses and not just conversations. How do we get there? You know, how do we get there?
Just really quickly, you know, just realizing how many veterans, so a part of the transition when right before you know, either separate or retire from the military is you spend about the last 6 months starting to prepare, where the Department of Labor, you have, there's job fairs, career fairs. I can't tell you how many veterans already have a secured job with Sheriff's Department, a police department, 6 months before they depart active duty. And again, the trauma that was unchecked, not popular to go to mental health and cure while on active duty, is now saturated in a lot of your local police departments and sheriff districts. And so, and I see that because when you talk about some of the issues that plague CPD, it's so normal, or it's familiar. Not normal, it's familiar to me because it is the same type of behaviors, aggressive, kind of like adrenaline, you know, not to use a jargon, but kind of adrenaline junkies, right? That have a high need for high ops tempo. These are the same folks that we see wearing the same, they didn't even have to change their clothes because they're wearing the same battle rattle that they had over in Afghanistan on the police department. And I think that that's why you see some of the numbers in the on-duty police suicides. I think you see it with the unchecked mental health needs that they have, because again, it's just this same, I really want to connect the police with the military, because I don't see, there's no light between the two of them from my perspective and what I've seen.
I wanted to make a point on this, because I feel that this was perhaps one of the biggest slaps in the face that I came across. I recently found out that our new interim superintendent of the CPD is Charlie Beck, and upon finding out that information, when you've been fighting so long against something and you feel that you made progress, something like this can literally feel like a slap in the face. And I just feel like the city of Chicago has just been boiling. There's just so many things that's been happening. Sometimes I just wonder, what to do next, And I feel that in this room, there's a lot of hope, I'm really soaking it, even though I'm one of the panelists, I'm really soaking in everything you guys are saying, because sometimes you have moments when you are hopeless, and reading the open letter from BLM, Los Angeles, it really, it literally lit a fire under me, and I feel like this is one of those moments where I want to act upon something, but I just don't know what to do. Just wanted to share that with y'all.
For those who didn't catch it, Black Lives Matter's Los Angeles reports that Beck presided over the highest number of murders of civilians that the country has seen. By police officers, sorry.
I just like to make one comment about elections and voting. I think our mindset about politicians is wrong. Politicians work for us. We are their employers. They are our employees. If I go to work and I don't do my job, what's going to happen? I'm going to get fired. And that's the mindset that we have to have about our elected officials, or we call them representatives. If they don't represent us, then we need to fire them. And it's really just that simple. And we don't think about it in terms of simplicity and that they work for us. We have to hold them accountable. And if we begin to vote people out of office who don't represent us in the way that we need to be represented, they need to lose their job.
Absolutely.
And it shouldn't take 8 years, 20 years. It shouldn't take that. I've recently become a big believer in term limits. But we don't even need term limits. We just need to vote our power. Because that power is ours to vote.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
It's on?
Yeah.
You're recording? First of all, to your point about sometimes feeling hopeless, I look around this room and I see this panel, and you are all doing the work. And whenever I feel like I'm getting hopeless and in such a state of despair about the world, I remind myself that there are millions of people all over the planet, like you and you and you and you and you, and everyone here, who are doing small things when you look at the big picture. But there are so many people who are working towards a better, more light-filled world. But to me, it comes down to allocation of resources. And it's not even red, white, blue, it's green. It's all about the money. War is a big money-making proposition. We care more about the bottom line. We talk about family values. Our only value, really, as a nation, and and we're all complicit, I'm sure, in some ways, large and small. As a nation, we have to be honest. We're kind of about the bottom line. And until the bottom line changes, then our nation won't change and the world won't change. I think we have to take accountability for our own behavior. We have to get out and vote. We have to demand that the people who represent us truly represent us. And I just want to commend all of you for continuing to do the work that you're doing, because even though it may not feel like it on a day-to-day basis, you're bringing light into the world.
Yeah.
And bless you all for that.
I just wanted to say a little thing about hope. I work with many disciplines at my job, and I do have the benefit of working with state's attorneys, child protection investigators, and 41 CPD investigators. And when I first started working at the Advocacy Center, I had my own stereotypes about working with police officers and all the things that I had heard or seen or observed. And what I can say is that working at the Chicago Children's Advocacy Center has changed my mindset about this group of detectives, this group of individuals. Commander Patty Casey, who's over youth investigations, has personally interviewed every single investigator who works at the Advocacy Center. Many of them are social workers, many of them have master's degrees, many of them are teachers. We do have people from the military, but one of the things that she has made a personal commitment to is saying that the people who come in here and do the work have to be, one, committed to do the work and understand that there are limits. Not to say that we don't have disagreements, because it's just natural. I'm a social worker, so I'm going to look at the world very different than a police officer or a teacher or anybody else. But we all have, at the core, our goal of making sure that children are served and get the best help that they possibly can. And one of the things I think when people talk about what we can do is we have a series called Bridging the Gap, right? And this series is based on the community. We invite the community to come in. We had an event, I want to say in August, where we called it Cookies and Coffee and Conversation with CPD and DCFS, where we brought the community in and we had police officers and child protection investigators sit in a room just like this, and we just opened up the floor to ask questions. And the youth asked really difficult questions, like, why do you keep killing people who look like me? Or why does this happen? And the police officers, there were times when it got a little tense. There were times when people got a little defensive, but overall, we had a group that was open and willing to hear the conversation. And I am really believing that it touched the lives of those kids who were in the room. It touched my life. And I know it's really small when we think about the big picture, but what we can do is having open, authentic, truthful conversations where we say, this is how you impact my life. What I found is that we have police officers who also have their own beliefs about the kids that they serve. They don't know the black and brown kids that they serve. What they hear is the statistics, and they see the violence, and they see all the things, just like we do, right? And so as they hear these stereotypes, myths become ingrained in their understanding, that's how they operate in the world. You know, they see people like me as threats, right? You know, and so it's important for us to be able to say and educate not just the kids, but also the police officers. You know, this kid isn't a threat because he just looks like this. You know, I actually got my master's at the University of Chicago, and I'm from the Bahamas, Nassau, Bahamas, and so I came here to go to grad school. And I often tell people I did not experience discrimination, racism, prejudice until I came to Chicago. I went to undergrad in Huntsville, Alabama, but I never experienced anything, racism, discrimination, anything, until I came to Chicago, Illinois. And it was on the University of Chicago campus. I was walking from school, SSA, to my dorm, and I was followed, 19 years old, by police officers from one end of, the University of Chicago, one end to the other end. And I'm thinking to myself, dude, it's snowing. Like, I'm really cold. If you really want to know who I am, give me a ride. You know, that would really resolve all of this. But that was my very first experience, and I remember thinking, if you would sit and talk to me, you would see that I wasn't a threat. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying on a very small level to get people to come and talk, because I think that I know that I got a new viewpoint of the people that I work with, just working at this job for a year, and I'm sure all those boys and adolescents who came and just had coffee with police officers got a viewpoint and a different way of viewing the world. So I encourage people to talk. I encourage people to sit around. I encourage people to go outside of their comfort zone and talk to somebody who doesn't look like them, who doesn't live in their own zip code, who's from a different place, and get to know them, because what you'll find is that a lot more similarities between people than there are differences.
think the one thing that we have to keep in mind when we're dealing with with people in a lot of our communities that are disenfranchised, that don't feel empowered to change their lives, we have to understand that hurt people hurt people.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And so if we continue to foster the hurt that our communities are experiencing, especially in Black and brown communities, they're going to continue to hurt people because they have to have some outlet. They have to be able to channel the hurt that they live with every single day. We need to have more resources in terms of trauma-informed care. A lot of what is going on in our communities is the result of PTSD. And we have to recognize it, as opposed to saying, well, those people, you know, they're thugs and they're hoodlums and they're this and they're that. They're hurt people. And they will continue to hurt people. And I think that that's the mindset that we have to begin to change, is stop looking at them a certain way. They're human beings. And if we don't invest in our communities, then we will continue to experience the same problems that we experience today.
Yeah.
And when I met China earlier, I told her, don't give up.
Yeah, that's important.
Don't ever give up.
Yeah, this has been a tremendously rewarding and enriching panel that has provided, for myself, a real sense of the possibility of community police education relations in this town, maybe across the country, when civilians bring their perspectives to the governance of the processes that control their experience in their cities. For instance, if you were in charge of the Chicago Police Department, if it had a civilian panel, an elected panel, determining who was the superintendent, determining what type of people would be preferred to be the hires, determining whether or not the most important thing was whether they could de-escalate a confrontation as opposed to shoot straight, whether or not there were resources going into the kind of activities that so many of you spoke of that would make the police, enable the police as human beings, they're human beings, to relate not only to their communities, but to the communities that they police and their families. And I think we have to talk about why that doesn't exist at this point. And it's not because people haven't been voting. People have been voting, but once they vote, they're told to go away and come back the next time the election is held. That if there's to be real change, people have to stay active, they have to stay in the streets, and when the politicians don't do what they promise to do, they have to occupy their suites. It's no longer suitable to wait another 4 years or 2 years or whatever it is. We don't have the time. Also, we've been in this room and talking about inequities and war, and the war in Chicago and the war around the world that our country is responsible for because of its imperialist policies, without mentioning class and imperialism. And you can't understand the role of capitalism dominated by the United States without addressing that and the problems it creates. Bernie Sanders talks about it, but the rest of them think that the system can somehow massage itself to fix the problem. We have an environmental crisis which will impact us all and shorten the ability of us to make the corrections that I've heard you so eloquently speak to on this panel. I'm not sure where I'm going to go with this question, but can you answer the issue of the role of class? Anybody can take it. Andy is excellent.
I'm going to interrupt. I think we can only have this room till 4 o'clock, and we've got two minutes to 4. It's a great
I'll leave
question,
it go as that, my open-ended question.
This conversation could. Pardon me. Okay, that's it. You're in charge of the room, not how you know.
Well, first, to be clear, I am for police and prison abolition. I don't think that they're to expect to have a nonviolent society and have boss and bossed, or people armed with guns and people, in prison. I don't think that's an oxymoron. The idea that you can have a violence-free and an equal society with those kinds of power imbalances. And there are things that we can do short of reaching that sort of society in terms of reining in the terror of the Chicago Police Department, its false arrests, its pinning crimes on people. There's any number of things that we can do, and we should do, but I think we should be clear about the goal, which is a society where people are not subject to these power imbalances and the violence that is used to maintain them, both within our country as well as the United States and other lesser powers, so to speak, dominating other areas of the world, that we should aspire for something a lot more just and humane than that. And I think, frankly, the future of the planet is dependent upon us getting to that non-domineering society.
And just real quick from the CPS, from the Chicago Public Schools perspective, right just before the strike, or I think it was in August, in lieu of investing in more counselors to provide wraparound services for the trauma and the violence that the young people in Chicago experience and inherently the schools absorb, Chicago Public Schools spent committed $33 million to the police in schools. They call the resource officers, right? Instead of investing in what the young people really need. And so then the Chicago Teachers Union went on the strikes, and you heard the stories around why these things are needed, why we need nurses and counselors. And when you look at a school system that is willing to invest in policing, knowing that we haven't yet turned the corner in terms of trust in police, right? And so, yes, abolition is one end, but while they're here, how do you behave and how do you interact with young people in a high school setting? I think that is one of the things in Chicago where the motivation and the priorities are just so far off. Even in the face of young people went and stood at the board and pleaded the reasons why they could use $33 million in other reimagined ways, right? And the board voted almost unanimously to invest that type of resource. So again, when we're talking about pushing against this domineering society, it's being learned in school. It's being normalized in school, and I think that we have to, continue to stand against that every time we see it as well.
And,
Okay. Yeah. This could certainly go on forever. I want to thank our panelists, Valerie, China, Carmel, Andy, and Natasha for such a great round of discussion. And I want to close with the quote I started with by Bob Kohler. I don't think he made it here today, but are you here? Hi, Bob. I start off with this quote, but I don't think you were here when I did. Part of his quote says, "Creating peace means creating connections with one another." So go forth, make connections with one another, and create peace. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
Real quick, if you all are on Facebook, we, the Chicago Veterans for Peace chapter, follow our page on Facebook. A lot of the panel members are involved in a lot of action. I know Good Kids Mad City, they have upcoming opportunities to support. We'll plug them on our Facebook page as well as any other groups around this conversation of what we talked about. Thank you.
Oh, okay.